Hello everybody, and welcome back to making this game. So far, we've made a working prototype and we added some visual elements to make it look better. Which is all fine and good, but still the game doesn't play very well because there's not really a score counter and that when we hit an obstacle, the game ends immediately. So for this tutorial, we're going to change all of that and add these two elements. So specifically for this tutorial, what I'm going to add is a score counter at the top of the game so the player can see for how long he or she has survived. And when an obstacle is hit, then we don't quit the game. Instead, we go to a title screen where the player can see a high score. And then he can start the game again or just quit the game. But doing all of that gets us to one specific kind of problem. Because we want to have a score in our main game and we want to have a score on the title screen. So effectively, we want to have the same information across two different scenes. And using signals or groups doesn't really work in this case because we don't really have anything that could trigger them. Instead, what we're going to use is a singleton, which really is just an object that is loaded automatically into every scene. So you have some kind of global information that is available to every single scene all the time. Which is perfect to run something like a score or a health counter. And in our case, we're going to use that to run the score. So let's implement all of them, and I'm going to start by just adding a title screen. So we are back here in Godot in our level main scene. And when you look at the bottom left, I have a new folder called Other. And in there I have a banner and a font. So a font is just how the text is going to look like. And to create a new scene, I click on Add New Scene at the top. And this time I click on User Interface. And this gives us a control node. And the advantage of a control node is that it automatically resizes with the window. And this is the kind of object that helps a lot to place elements on a screen. And the first thing I'm going to add is called a texture rectangle. This basically works like a sprite node, except that it would work with the control node. And into this texture rec, I just put in the banner, just like with sprites. So now we have our jump cut, and I just place it roughly in the middle. Although we could also use the layout and put it center top, and then move it down a little bit. Roughly like that. Then I'm going to copy this by pressing Ctrl D and move this a little bit further down. And this time I'm going to add the jumping cat. And right now it's quite a bit too large, so I'll go to undirect. And I give this 0.5 and 0.5. Yeah, it looks about right. And I place this roughly below the banner. And we don't have a background picture right now, so I'm going to add, just like we did before, a color rect. And again, it's just on the top left, so let's change the layout to full rect and move it behind the other rectangles. And then we need to change the color of it. So I go to the rectangle that we created earlier and I just copy this hexadecimal code. And when I'm back here, I just paste it back in, and now we have some kind of title screen, which is a pretty good start. What I want now is to add a text at the bottom here and make this show the high score, or at least for now, a stand-in for the high score. And to add text in Godot, we need a label node. Or let's say there are a couple of ways to add text, but label is the easiest one. So I click on Create. And now we see the node. It doesn't have anything in there. So just as a placeholder, I'm going to add high score. And right now you can't really see it because it's white, but you can kind of see it. And also doesn't look very good, but we are going to fix that in just a second. Okay, and to move this around, I'm going to click again on layout, and this time on center bottom. So now the text is at the bottom here. And then I go to margin, and I'm going to change the top part a little bit. Let's say like that. So now we have text at the bottom here. But we need to change the color and the styling of it. And this all happens down here under custom styles, fonts, colors, and constants. The first thing I do is change custom colors, and I want the font color. And now we can change the color again. This works just like with the color rects. And I'm going to use the color picker and pick from the outline of the cat this brownish color. Now we can actually see the text a bit better. But we still want to change the font, and this happens under custom fonts. So I click on it, and then I click on Empty and New Dynamic Font. And now I need to click on this again, and now we can set what kind of information we want in. And to get a custom font, we need to click on font and then drag our big bottom font in there. And now we can see that the font has changed, so the text looks better. Although it's now a bit off-centered, so I go back to layout and add this again to center bottom, and now we're exactly in the middle. You could add something like size, but I think I'm fine like that. Let's say we get it to 20. Yeah, 20 is good. And again, center bottom. And I could probably move it up a little bit higher. Okay, that looks about right. One thing I forgot though is that I also want the text press space to start here, so the player knows how to start the game. So I just copy this note, move it up a little bit, and just write in press space to start, just to start. And I'm going to center this again because I changed the information in there. All right, and now we have a rough kind of title screen. One thing more we need to change is that by default, this one is not coming up because when we just press F5, oh, I haven't saved it even yet. So let me rename it to title screen, and I'm going to create a new folder that I'm also going to call title screen. So the problem right now is that when we launch our game by pressing F5, we go straight to the game level scene. But we want to start with this scene. And to change which scene is the first, we all need to go to project and project settings, and then under run, we can change the main scene. And in my case, I want to go with title screen. And that's pretty much it. So now the game is going to start on this scene. But we don't have any way to go from this scene to the next scene. So we need to add some code to this one that when we press a button, it goes to the actual main level scene. And for that, I'm going to add a script to this scene in the same folder, and it's going to be empty. So click on create. And now we need a function that checks on every single frame if the player has pressed a button and then do something with the information. And since it's every frame, we need the underscore process function. And all I want to check is the input. So if input is action just pressed, and we can use the jump button because that one was space. So now we check if the player has pressed the button. Now, if the player has pressed the button, we want to change the scene, which we get with get tree and then dot change scene. And then Godot gives us all the scenes in our game. And in our case, we want to go to level, so write the first one. And this should actually work now. So let's try all of this. So we can see our main title game now. And if I press space, we get straight to the game. And this works as usual. If I run into something, the game stops. And that's the next thing we want to change. That if the player runs into an obstacle, we don't want to end the game. Instead, we want to go back to the title screen. So let me open the level scene. So here we are in our level scene. Oh, actually it wasn't our player scene. Right, my bad. So let me open the player scene. And in this function, we just end the game. But instead of quitting, I want to change the scene to our title screen. And that's really all we needed to do, because all of this function, when the player has collided with an obstacle, then it always goes back to the player scene here. So this one is quite easy to change. And all of this should work already. So let's try this. So we still come to the title screen. And if I run into an obstacle, let's wait. We come back here, and now we can start the game again. And yeah, we can start to play as many times as we want. So we don't end the game immediately when the player makes a mistake. All right, so this is working quite nicely already. But now I want to have a score along with all of this. And this player should also be able to see the score. So in the level scene, I also want the label up here that shows the player score. So let me add a label here as well that has the current score. And I'm gonna just place this in center top and move it down with margin. Then I'm going to change the color of it. just like before. It's pulled in, works. So here we have our current score, and I'm also going to change the font style. So custom fonts, I click on new dynamic font again, I click on it again, then font, and then I drag in our big bottom font. Now we can see our score. And let me just move it back to the center. Okay, so now we can see a score both in our level scene and in our title screen. The problem right now is that those are not connected. So we need to find a way that when this score is updating, this score also gets some kind of information. And the best way to achieve all of this is with a singleton. And the singleton really is just an object that you load into every single scene by default, so it's always available. So let me start by creating a new scene that is just going to be a plain node. And I'm going to call this node global. And then I'm going to give it, or let me save it first. And I'm going to save it in a new folder that I'm also going to call global. Although you could name this whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Now we have a global scene. And I'm going to give this a script that I'm also going to call global. And it's going to be empty. And just to test this, let's give this a variable that I'm going to call score. And let's call it just 10 by default. Now we want to declare this node here a global node that is available to every single scene all the time. And to do that, we have to go to project, project settings, and then to auto load. And auto load just means it's being automatically loaded. And now we need to select scene or really any kind of object. It doesn't need to be a scene. And I saved mine in the global, and I'm going to choose global scene. And click on open. And important, now you can name this, but I keep the global name and you do click on add. And singleton needs to be enabled. That's quite important to access it easier. And that's all we needed. So if I close it now, nothing really changed when you first look at it. But let me run the game now by clicking on F5. And if I now go to remote, you can see the global scene is available. And also, when I start the game, we should be seeing the level and the global scene. So we have two different ones. And with that, we know that this global scene is available in every single scene. So we can use information from there in our main game and in our title screen. So let me stop the game. So now we just need to work with this logic and update the text depending on what's in the score. So how I solve this, that I have a current score that is 0 by default, and then I have a var high score that is also 0 by default. And in our title screen, whenever this is ready, then I want to update the text with whatever the high score is. And to do that, I think I called it label. Let me check. Behind title screen, high score. Let's rename this to high score text. Because we're going to use this one just now so we can identify it easier. So this is high score text, and now we can find it. Dot text. So now we need to add the information here. And I start with a string called high score. And now I want to add the information from the global node. And to do that, I just need to type global, how the node is called. And now I believe I called it high score, or not? High score. And we need to turn this, right now it's an integer, it needs to become a string. And this is done easily with the str function. And all this one does is it takes a number and turns it into a word, basically. And just to try this. Yeah, perfect. Now we have high score 0, because right now the high score is 0 because it wasn't updated. And in our level scene, this one, I'm going to add a new timer. that I'm going to call score timer. So this one actually updates how long we have survived in the game. And I'm going to connect this with a signal to our main level, and I'm going to keep the name as it is. And I'm going to change it to 1 and auto start. So 1 is already in there. That we have every second the game updates the score by +1. So on every second, this one runs, and what we want to do is global.score. I think we call it current score plus equal 1. So at every second, this current score gets higher by 1. So now we actually have our score. Now what we want is to display this score, which we can do with func_process. And I just called it label.text equals score. And this one now works exactly like the one we did before. So we want again a string, and we're going to go to global and current score. And I think this one should work already. So here we're going to update the high score in just a bit. But for now, if we just go to the game, we have an updating score. So the longer the game survives, the higher the score is going to get. The problem we have right now is that when we bump into an obstacle, the high score doesn't update. So let's work on this one now. And I'm going to do this in our title screen. And the only logic we really want here is that if global.current score is greater than global.high score. So if our score from the latest game is higher than the global high score, then global.high score is equal to global.current score. So all this line really says is that if our current score is greater than the latest high score, then the high score becomes the current score. So we set a new high score. And yeah, if we run this game now, this should actually be working. So we start with 0, and let me just bump into the first obstacle so we can see an update. So now we have 4. If we run it again, we start again with 4, so that's a problem we have to work on. But if we bump into an obstacle now, we go to 10. So this almost works. The one thing left to do is that when the game starts, the current score remains the high score. So we need to change that, and that's quite easy. So in our level scene, when this one is ready, so func_ready, then we just want to set the global current score to 0. So all it basically means is that whenever we start the game, the current score is set back to 0. And all of that should be working now, actually. So we start again with a high score of 0, start the game. We get a higher score. Now we have 4, and now when I start again, we again start at 0. And let me survive until a higher number, 6. And yeah, now we have 6. So with that, we have a working high score system, which brings us a lot closer to an actually finished game. There are a couple of details left, and those I'm going to cover in the next tutorial. I'll see you then.